you had wheel spin, you had oversteer. I mean, you had it all. And today, I think the cars are able to get them to be so balanced, and the tires are so good, comparatively speaking, that I would have to say I think our cars were maybe more difficult.
Well, it's a pleasure to have a icon and a legend on the show, Bobby Woodward Rahal. If I would have had the name Bobby Wood, I would have used the shit out of that name. Hollywood. That was. I never knew that was your middle name.
Yeah, I was never happy about that. That was my mother's maiden name, which I don't have a problem with that. But of course, when I was in school as a little kid, everybody had like normal names for their middle name, like William and Joseph and whatever. And I always had Woodward. And I thought, oh God, the first day of school every year was like, you just cringed because you knew somebody was going to call you Woody, or they were going to make fun of you. So anyway, but luckily they don't do that anymore.
You really need no introduction in motorsports to the hardcore race fan, but there's a lot of new young fans of IndyCar and race and sports cars that maybe don't know your background, know you really only as a team owner, but 3-time IndyCar winner or IndyCar champion,
right?
Indy 500 winner, 24 wins, 24-hour of Daytona winner, 12-hour of Sebring winner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Can-Ams, sports cars, Formula One. Did you do any NASCAR too?
I did one NASCAR race for the Wood Brothers. Yeah,
everything. You've done everything.
Everything but sprint cars, midgets. Never drove any of that stuff, but everything else pretty much.
All right, so I got to get the funny question out of the way. After I started researching your career, you used to wear this helmet in the 70s with two eye holes.
Yeah.
How the hell did you get your glasses on?
Well, they fit. They were very narrow, the glasses, so it fit through the helmet. And of course, that was the hot helmet to. It wasn't just me. Jackie X had a helmet like that. John Watson. There were a couple, and that was because of all the catch fence. They used catch fencing if you went off prior to hitting the guardrail, and they had these big 3x3 posts, vertical posts that held the catch fencing, and they had a bad habit of going through the eye port in a helmet. So that Bell came up with that split eye port helmet, and that kind of solved that problem.
Obviously I raced against you at the beginning of my career through the meat of a lot of your success. But there's a lot I knew about your career from racing with you, but there was a lot that I didn't know about you. And I didn't realize that you had such a late start to racing. Like you didn't start till you were 20, 21, till after you were done at college. And your dad raced in SCCA. Why such a late start?
Well, at that time in 71, 72, you had to be kind of legally an adult, and they identified that by the voting age.
Yeah, but you could go to war. You could go to Vietnam, right?
Oh, yeah.
But you couldn't drive a race car, but you could hang on to a machine gun, right?
Yeah, you could go to Vietnam at 18, but you couldn't vote till you're 21. They changed that in, I think it was 1972 to 18, as far as being legally considered an adult, being able to vote, whatever. So, I didn't start till I was 20, which was 1973. And, but that was the way it was then. Nobody was driving at 15 or 16 like they do today.
But you were at the racetrack, obviously, with your dad. Oh, yeah. Did you go to the track, go to the races, the SCCA races with your dad, help mechanic on the car? So you were around the races the whole time.
Well, I grew up in the 60s, right? I graduated high school in 1971, but I was, all throughout the 60s. He raced, and again, he was an SCCA guy, but we went to Sebring. He raced at Sebring for the 12-hour race a number of years, and Watkins Glen for the 6-hour race. And of course, the world came to those tracks in those days, and the Porsche 917s and the Ferrari 512s, and I mean, just an amazing period of time. And so I was, up to my eyeballs in racing. but only as a crewman or a,
Yeah.
part-time, kind of a amateur mechanic. But I just grew up around sports cars. My dad always had sports cars. I grew up around his racing. So for me, the hook was set
Yeah.
deeply. And, I was, I never thought I'd race, period, let alone as a living, but I was very fortunate to get my start in 1973 and then go from there.
You basically, when I look back now, you went straight into the deep end. Like you went Formula Atlantic, which then was called, what was it, Formula B back then?
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, actually, when I started in 73, my dad had an old Lotus racing car from 1967. It was not a competitive car for the class at the time, but it was a good place to start. And then I convinced him to buy a 2-liter Lola, that was much more of a current race car at the time.
Yeah.
And I drove that a little bit in 73 and then in 74. Won the SECA National Championship in the Midwest in that car and went to the runoffs, finished third there. So now that was a fast car. That was 170 mile an hour, 160 mile an hour, 2-liter sports racing car. So,
well, in those days, that was basically one step below Formula One or IndyCar,
well,
basically at that time, kind of.
probably, below K&M for sure.
Yeah.
And, and I, then the following year in 75, I went Atlantic racing, and Atlantic racing was really proper. It was all young guys, all aspiring to get to the top, whether that's Formula One or Indy or whatever. And that's when I raced against Gilles Villeneuve, for example, in those days.
That's where I was going. Like, year 2, 3, you go straight into like, pretty serious race cars. Like what I'm saying is there's no karting, no Formula 4, Formula V. You kind of went right to the deep end and jumped in. And then like literally within, your national champion in your second year. And then you're racing against Gilles Villeneuve, who, you finished second to Gilles in the championship. And he goes on right from there to Formula One. And so do you. You got within a couple of years, you're in Formula One.
In those days we would race. They had a race in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, which was the big Atlantic race of the year, and they would invite over Formula One, Formula Two drivers to run, and then that was our chance for us North Americans, Canadians, and Americans to show how good we were, or at least try to show how good we were. So it was from that race that Gilles got his chance to drive a McLaren at Silverstone in 1977. And frankly, my chance to get to Formula 3 in Europe in 78 and then go on and do 2 Grand Prix at the end of that year. So the Formula Atlantic series was a tremendous series. KK Rosberg, future world champion. He was in the series at the time. So it was really a great series to learn in, and without question prepared me for
well, what do you think got you to progress that quickly? Because you see kids now that come up that make it to IndyCar, make it to Formula One. They're literally now starting at 4 or 5 years old. And they're racing every single weekend, all over North America, Europe, and then they're in every formula going up through. And you basically jumped into the deep end head first. How did you get the speed so quick?
I guess it was kind of natural, I suppose. Because you didn't really have driving schools like you have today.
Yeah.
And I didn't do go-karting, as you were saying earlier. Today, as you say, these kids going into cars at 14, 15 years old, they've been racing go-karts for 8 years by that time. And so we never really had that. So, I don't know. I guess I just kind of took to it. But also in those days, you didn't have the restrictions on testing. That you do today. So you were able to go out and you could go testing, and you did a fair amount of that at the time. But in the end, I guess, I don't know. I just, I liked it and it liked me. And we were pretty successful. I was competitive, and I was always, I was always there to try to win. I wasn't there just to show up.
Yeah.
So I think that drive is what caused me to kind of come up through the ranks fairly quickly.
This podcast is brought to you by Racer and Racer.com, the leading motorsports news and information source in North America. With special thanks to trusted silver and gold trading partner and studio sponsor ITM Trading and Scottsdale-based Apex Motor Club. I'm a member there. It's a membership-only private track racing community right here in Phoenix. If you want to go racing, that's the place to be. So a lot of racing for you. It seems like there was quite a lot on a lot of really tough, demanding tracks. Like you raced a lot in Canada, Motorsport, Saint-Gervais, Three Rivers, Trois-Rivières,
Westwood, British Columbia.
You went all the way out to Vancouver to Westwood, and then you had obviously, Watkins Glen. These are daunting tracks. They're super fast.
Yeah. As you say, Motorsport, I love Motorsport, in Canada. I mean, that's talk about a track that separates the men from the boys. For me, it's like when I went to Europe to race in 1978, that's where I wanted to go. That was a dream come true for me. So going to race it at Monza or Brands Hatch or race at the Nürburgring in 1978 in Formula 3 and finish third, my first time there. I mean, to me, that was the goal. That's what I wanted to do. And so going to those tracks and going to those racing in those series at the time was, as I say, it was a dream come true for me.
So you finished second to Gilles. Obviously, he was, went on to be a huge name worldwide in Formula One. Still is to this day, even though he had a very, very short career. But you get connected with another Canadian guy, obviously because you were racing in Canada so much, with Walter Wolf, which was a smaller Formula One team, and he takes you to Formula One, but it really only lasted 2 or 3 races.
Yeah, I mean, I had after the Long Beach Grand Prix in 1978 in the Atlantic race, I was on pole, and then I got hit on the pace lap. Had to make a pit stop for a new right rear tire. Started half a lap down, and halfway through the race, I was in second, and I was about right behind the guy who ended up winning. Had a drive shaft break, so that ended that. But going into that race, Walter had said to me that depending on how we did, that there might be an opportunity to run Formula 3 for him in Europe that year. So luckily, even though I didn't win the race or didn't finish the race, his guy, another Canadian, Rod Campbell. So Rod came up to me after the race and said, "Hey, Walter wants to see you." Went to see him at his hotel. He said, "Okay, you're in, you're done. We want you. You have to be in Italy at the Dallara factory in like a week or two later." And off I went, and I drove the first ever Dallara Formula 3 car. And that was, so I did the races in Europe for Walter that year that were associated with Formula One events. So I ran Monaco, I ran Nürburgring, I ran Dijon, France, all these races, Austria, places like that. But the idea being that I would then do Formula One in 1979. It also meant that I would do U.S. and Canadian Grand Prix in 78, which I did. And in fact, Montreal was the first Montreal Grand Prix, and in fact, Gilles won that race in front of the home crowd for him, which was fantastic. But at the end of after the races, James Hunt switched. Jody Scheckter left Wolf, went to Ferrari. James Hunt came on board the Wolf team, and he only wanted a 1-car team. So yours truly was on the outside looking in.
So that point, you come back to America, and you go into Can-Am, and with Jim Truman, who was a friend of yours from the SCCA days. I would assume he probably raced against your dad. So that's how you guys knew each other. And then you go into Can-Am, and Can-Am is, to me, it's like one of those lost formulas that the cars were just so badass. Yeah. Like they were F1 chassis, IndyCar chassis, big tires, massive downforce, and kind of run whatever you can come up with aerodynamically. Teams would build their own aero kits, and I think to me, a Can-Am car is what a real race car should be.
Well, they were They were actually faster than the big block Can-Am cars that series stopped in 1974. We think about the 91730
Yeah.
Porsche, the turbo Porsche, the big McLarens, with the 8-liter V8 engines in them and what have you. And yet when so Can-Am was based on Formula 5000, which was a, open wheel car, 5-liter Chevy, for the most part, Chevy V8. But by the time that series started in 1976 or 7 was the first year, those cars were now going faster than the big block cars. And so when we would race them at
Well, I would imagine they would be quicker than an F1 car or an Indy car with the level of downforce.
They were close. Yeah, they were close. They were close at Watkins Glen. That was my first Can-Am race that year. I think I qualified in the front row. KK and I qualified in the front row, and I think I was like half a second off pole for the Formula One race, like 5 months or 6 months earlier. So they were fast, and that was a great. You had a lot of good people in that series. A lot of guys I'd raced against in Atlantic that then made the step to Can-Am. So I drove a couple of years in the Can-Am series, and that was just before I got into Indy cars with Jim Turner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you miss those times back then when in those Can-Am days, a team could go get a Lola or a March Formula 5000 car, and a lot of those teams just kind of eyeball fabricated their own aerodynamics.
Well, they did.
And made their own parts. Yep. And it was really every car on the grid was a different looking, or had a different idea of how to get the job done. No,
for sure. I mean, that's good and bad.
Yeah.
If the aero work was good, that was good. But it's a lot of part-time aero guys, trying to figure it out. We had a different body on my car compared to everybody else, but it was a very good design. A guy in Southern California did the body work, did the design work, built the body, and it was quite a good. Aerodynamically. I think it was actually maybe the better of all the bodies that were out there at the time in that series. And I know later on you drove a Can-Am car that had a shovel nose, which was another great bodywork design that was done by. John Morton had one, and
it was a Frisbee that I drove. I drove for Horst Kroll, who had a Volkswagen shop down the street from our house, and my dad would go by and bug him all the time and tease him he would tease him about his wig all the time and lift it off of his head. So
I know Horst.
I was
one of my fathers.
Yeah, I was only 17 at the time, and all that I had driven up to that point was an F2000 car, and he had asked me if I wanted to drive his spare car, which was I think it was Al Jr.'s old car. And then it was passed to Jacques Villeneuve Sr., which was Gilles' brother. Right. And then Horst got a hold of it. So he had two cars. And it was frightening. Like I remember the first time I went out in it at Motorsport, it was pouring rain in first practice session. And like this thing was spinning the tires all the way up the straightaway in fifth gear, so it's, but to me, those cars, it's kind of that series, the Can-Am, it's kind of a forgotten. I would tend to agree with you. I think, it's overlooked a little bit because it's not the original Can-Am, but it was very good racing. They were very fast. In fact, by the time that series ended in, I think it was 1981 or 82. They were extremely fast race cars, ground effect. Really, really fast. And so, but you're right. I think they are kind of overlooked a little bit, and that's a shame because it was great racing. Yeah. So you're competing in that, and obviously you're now working with Jim Truman. Mm-hmm. And then you guys decide to go into the IndyCar arena. Right. And at that time in IndyCars, there was only two chassis. It would have been Lola and March. And immediately you're successful. You start winning races right away in your career in IndyCars.
I don't know if I want to say that. Jim in 1981, Jim said to me, if you're smart, you'll say yes to everything I say. And of course, I'd known Jim since, for 5 or 6 years by that time. And he'd always been a sponsor of mine. And so I said yes, because I didn't really have much on the horizon, frankly. And so he agreed to sponsor the car. I had to go out and find people to buy the cars and the engines, which I did. And we got Steve Horn, who'd been with the VDS racing team in the Can-Am and Formula 5000 series. He came on as the team manager, but I think we had 5 or 6 people max on the team, considerably different than what you see today. And but none of us had any open wheel experience. I mean, we had zero. And I remember our first race was Phoenix, which, as you know, Phoenix is a
super fast,
pretty daunting, 1 mile oval. And this is again, the beginning of ground effects and IndyCar racing. And, we were like babes in the woods. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. And I didn't qualify that great. I think I qualified maybe 20th out of 27 cars. And then the first pit stop, they caught me on fire. And we were so shy. And then, of course, that was that. And then we didn't go to the second race, which was Atlanta Speedway, because we were so shocked that it was like, oh my God, and the race after Atlanta was going to be Indy. So we're going, we need to figure this out, because, we can't go to Indy looking like this. And we skipped Atlanta. And at that time, and I will say, we got a lot of help from some of the people in the industry that kind of gave us, taught us the ropes a little bit. And then we went to Indy, qualified. Actually, I was running 5th in the race with about 10 laps to go when the engine broke. But oh my God, that first race in Phoenix was just, I'd driven a bunch of cars by that time. Formula One, I'd driven turbocharged Porsches at Le Mans.
Yeah.
Cars going well over 200 miles an hour. And we went to that race, and it was like I'd never driven anything in my life. And of course, as you might know, I don't know if you felt the same, but when you're a road racer and you see an oval and all they're doing is turning left, right? And then you quickly find out there's a lot more to it than that.
Well, the cars, you say it was a small team, but when you look back at the pictures and the history and you see the cars, these cars, they were presented very well. They're beautiful looking cars, Budweiser sponsorship, polished suspension, polished wheels. The Truman team, the True Sports, it was this pretty slick operation in those days.
Yeah, it was. And we had a great culture in that team. Steve Horn was a great team manager. We had a number of guys that had worked with him for a number of years and within the team. Jim Prescott, who worked for me on the Can-Am team, he was on that team. Jim Prescott still works for me today. And he was my chief mechanic all the years that I not just drove for True Sports, but when I left and then went to start my own team in 1990 at Galles-Kraco. Jim left True Sports and went to Galles-Kraco, was my crew chief there. And, and so there weren't many of us, but everybody in that team just gelled.
Yeah.
Like you can't believe. And there's no question that had a lot to do with why we were so successful in the 80s.
Yeah. I was going to get to that because, you're having all the success with True Sports. Obviously, Jim was kind of a mentor in the beginning, a sponsor, put you to an IndyCar. Obviously, he passed away in it was 86 or 87, right after you won the Indy 500.
Right.
So everything's going great. The results are there. You got big sponsorship. Why did you leave and go to Galles-Kraco?
Well, originally it was Kraco. Before Maury Cranes, who owned Kraco, before he and Rick Galles got together. Why did I leave? That's one of those decisions that you look back and you think, that maybe was not the best decision at the time. Now True Sports had gone in the direction of the Judd engine, which was a kind of a one-off engine that was based on.
I drove it one time. It was like a light switch. It was either on, it was on or off.
Yeah. So And I didn't think that was a thing to do. And I just felt that, Steve was going in one direction and I was going in the other. And of course, Jim was gone. And at the time, when he was alive, Jim was the guy who steered the ship. And if he thought we should be going in a different direction, he'd say why, and he'd say, and everybody would agree. Off we go. So, but there's no question that that had we stayed together, I think that maybe would have been more successful. I don't know. But we did have success with Galles-Kraco. We didn't have such a great year in '89 with the Kraco team. The Cosworth engine we used was pretty unreliable at the time. But by 90, 91, now we had the Chevy like you had with Penske.
Yeah.
And that was a very good engine. And then, of course, 92, I started my own team. At the end of 91, I started my own team using the Chevy Ilmore engine, and we won the championship. So,
So I some of your guys that were at Galles-Kraco, I worked with Barry Green, Kyle Moyer, and they were telling stories to me. This is way back in the day for me back in the day, but they said that team, it was pretty contentious environment. It was really two teams. It was Al Jr. show, and then it was Galles-Kraco team, and it kind of operated as two separate teams. And there wasn't a lot of teamwork going on back in those days.
There was certainly a competitiveness between the two of us, and which I think is not a bad thing. I mean, I remember, I think it was our first year in '80. I beat Al at Phoenix. I was second, he was third, and he was not happy about that. But I developed a good relationship with Al to this day. We're good friends, and I don't know why, because we come from two totally different backgrounds, but somehow we got along. And was it? Maybe it was. It was skewed towards Al, but in the end, we had a lot of strong races together. And he won the championship in '90. I was second in '91. We still had had good runs, even though there was this competitiveness within the team. And it's interesting.
I had spoken to Al a couple of times about what it was like, and I'm sure we'll get him on the podcast. But even within the Unser family, he said that they would all lie to each other about their setups. What are you running? And they tell you something that was not on the car.
Bobby Unser never told anybody what he had.
Yeah.
Even in the days when he was running at Penske, he was telling Rick Mears something totally different. So, but I would have to say that about a year ago, there was an article in an English racing magazine, and Al gave me credit for all the setups. He said, the reason I was successful is because I used Bobby's setup. So that was nice to hear. But, anyway, they were 2 good years, but there's no question that that was an Albuquerque, New Mexico-based team, and I wasn't from Albuquerque.
Yeah. So you start your own team, then you connect at that time with Carl Hogan.
Yeah.
This was going into 91.
Right.
And you kind of reconnect back to what you left, really, because the direction that True Sports was going in '89, '90 was to build their own car.
Yep.
And you decided to leave at that point because they were going in a direction that you didn't think was going to work for you. I didn't drive the True Sports car, but I won the Lights Championship in 1990, and Steve Horn gave me a test at Mid-Ohio in the 90 car, which was a Lola with the Judd, and it was all a fully modified Lola. It had their own gearbox on it and their own suspension and their own ideas of what was going to go into that True Sports car. But getting back, the reason you left, then you came back and bought into the team and started running the True Sports car, which was a bit of a struggle. It's a beautiful, pretty car to look at aerodynamically. It looked fast as hell, but the performance really wasn't there.
Well, I mean, at the end of '92, we won the championship, my third championship. And, this is probably, this is one of those times you teach yourself a lesson. And at the end of 92, we thought, well, hell, we had a good little team. I had Jim McGee, who was one of the great team managers in IndyCar racing, had been around forever. Everybody had, Mario drove for him. I mean, they're just about everybody. And, when we started the IndyCar team at the end of 91, it was based in Indy. And I thought, well, maybe we ought to look at this thing. And of course we had the True Sports had a great shop there.
Yeah.
And so, you think after 92 when you win the championship, it's like, oh, hell, we can do anything. Well,
I kind of skipped over when you got to the True Sports car. I'd forgotten that you were in a Lola there for a couple years. And I arrived on the scene in 91, partial season. 92 was more of a 3/4 season when Rick got hurt, but you won 4 races in 92. And right. I think a couple of them I might have handed to you because I was busy mixing it up with Michael, and him and I were busy running into, we were running into each other, and you would just slide on by.
I'll give you credit for my win at Detroit. That was a great one because, I was right behind you two guys and you were just banging on each other. And I said, I'm just going to wait and we're going to take each other off and see. But I was like 40 years old at the time and you guys were like 20. So I had the wisdom of the ages.
Michael,
but we did win 3 other mile tracks.
The
mile ovals. And that I loved mile ovals. So that was I
remember you won Detroit, or you won Phoenix, Detroit. Was it New Hampshire?
Yep. New Hampshire and then Nazareth.
Yeah. I think Nazareth, I might've been on the podium with you, or maybe it was the Marlboro Challenge, something like that.
I mean, something, maybe. Well, I know Michael was on the podium in Nazareth. He finished second and he was not happy.
No, he tracked me down. The next race that I did was in Toronto, and him and I didn't get along at all. And, like my dad was back in those days he was like, those 2 guys, Al Jr. and Michael, those are the guys to beat. And I don't want you taking any those guys. Right. So I had to live up to what my dad expected of me to do as a race driver, to be tough and strong. And so we get to wheel banging at Detroit. You end up winning. The next race, I think, was Toronto, and I qualify in the top 3 and Michael's in the top 3. We do the press conference. And we come out of the press conference and he grabs me and pulls me to the side, and he grabs me by the collar of my shirt. And he says, "You ever race me like that again?" He goes, "I'm going to put you in the wall." And I'm like, I was just a kid then. So I was like,
hey, you're supposed to race hard. That's the deal.
Well, the Al and Michael didn't like you running them too hard, because they were, really they were the they were the big show, right? They were kind of close in age to me, and and
I think Al was a smart driver. I always told people he may not have been the greatest qualifier, but if he qualified in the front row or the front couple of rows, that was all over. He was going to win the race.
He was like you. He'd sneak up on you. Like you wouldn't even know where he came from, right? Just like at Detroit, you're just sitting there watching, and then next thing you know, you're 5 seconds in front of us, right?
Yeah, that was fun. I enjoy watching that race on TV when it comes on. But so it was a great year. But getting back to the True Sports project, that was something that we did because we thought we could do anything. And we quickly found out that was not the case. And of course, the upshot of all that was I didn't qualify at Indy in 1993. And that was just a horrible, horrible experience for me to not qualify at the Indy 500 and to sit there and watch the race with my sponsors. From our suite, and yet everybody, as I said, as I said to somebody, I belonged out there on the track, not where I was, and so I learned a good lesson from that, but it wasn't without some pain for sure.
Yeah. So, back in those days when I really look at IndyCar now versus then, your career probably was through the pinnacle of IndyCar. I would say for me, from 86, 87 to 97, was the height of IndyCar racing. You had tons of sponsors. Everybody was making lots of money, big TV ratings, racing all over the world, engine manufacturers. What, you've been in the sport a long time. What right now do you think is missing that the fans don't see now versus what it was back then?
Well, I mean, I think that, so there's a lot of variation that you don't have today. And in that variation, that separated the field a lot. I think today everybody's got the same car. You have two different engines, but there's such parity in the series that today the competitiveness in the field is unbelievable. And it was competitive in our day, especially maybe the top 10 or top 6, 8. But then it would drop off. Today, it's so competitive, and the smallest of things make such difference today that you didn't see back then. When I look at how we prepare the body work and what have you, the body fit on a car today, we did none of that stuff back in those days, because you almost didn't think about it, frankly. You had so much power. You had different tires. You had different levels of performance by various teams. Good teams, like today, good teams made a big difference. But there was, because of that differentiation between everything, it was easy for one team or two teams to be a little more dominant than you see today.
Well, I mean, the teams like Penske back in those days, they were doing body fit, and they were doing, specialized greases and bearings on stuff for qualifying, and special oil for the gearbox for qualifying. But when I look at it, it's like you said, it's so tight and competitive now.
It's crazy.
But is that a factor? Do you think the cars in your day were harder, or are they harder now, or easier now? Because I mean, the cars that we drove, especially in the late 90s, I mean, we're kind of pushing 900 plus horsepower and qualifying at 240 miles an hour.
Well, or having 900 horsepower on a street circuit. And it's everything you can do to keep that thing going in a straight line. You didn't have, some people might have traction control, but, I mean, I thought those cars were, they were brutal to drive. They were beasts.
Yeah. You had a turbo the size of a 12-inch pizza in the gearbox. And the drivability back then, they were all pushing for huge power numbers for super speedways. But on street courses, there was like terrible drivability.
Yeah. Well, the difference is when we were in those days, you were over 200 miles an hour going to turn 1 and to turn 5 and to turn 12. The cars today are 185, maybe, 15 miles an hour slower, maybe a little bit more. And yet they're doing basically the same lap time.
Yeah.
Because the cars are so much faster.
A different way.
They're doing it through the corners. Braking is a lot probably better than it is than what we had. So it's just different. But there was no question that I think, in my day, and I retired in 98, but in 98, I remember, going to Surfer's Paradise, having all that power, and the tires were nowhere near as good as they are today. And it was really, like I say, I mean, you had to drive that thing. I mean, that thing was a beast, and it was, you had wheel spin, you had oversteer. I mean, you had it all. And today, I think the cars are able to get them to be so balanced, and the tires are so good, comparatively speaking, that I would have to say I think our cars were maybe more difficult. That's simple.
Graham probably doesn't want to hear that, does he?
Well, I'll tell you what. And Graham, he drove 2007.
Yeah.
Was his first year in kart with Newman Haas. And those cars had like probably 850 horsepower.
Yeah, that was a fast car. That DP01 champ car was a pretty quick car. A really quick car.
And now we're with the hybrid, we're probably getting close to that power number. So they are definitely getting back there. But I remember those. In 2000, when the Toyotas and the Hondas, they were revving those engines to like 18, 19,000 RPMs for an engine that didn't have pneumatic valves. It was a conventional valve spring. So there was what I loved about that period of time is there was such development that was going on, whether it was aero, whether it was engine, but you name it. And that was a pretty amazing period of time for sure.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I kind of compare it even to the Can-Am days. Can-Am days, it was like eyeball engineering. And during that period of IndyCar from 93 to 2000, I mean, it was a lot of it. It was Formula One level engineering going on. And especially we had more power than Formula One cars during that time period.
Yeah. People still refer back to that, fans, because there was such variation. And it would be nice to get a third engine builder in today in IndyCar just to create more of that variation and create more interest. But in any event, still the racing today is so, I mean, you look at the qualifying grid and it's ridiculous. If you're on the wrong end of the 10th, you're 4 rows back. And so the intensity level, I would say, is greater today than it was then, or the lack of, you just can't make mistakes today. And I think back in our day, you could maybe get away with a couple and not really materially affect, where you finished. Whereas today, it makes a big difference.
Do you get involved anymore in driver debriefs? Telling the drivers what to do? Like, I mean, I know that you've had some pretty good fights on the radio with Graham, and you kind of pulled back off of calling his races many years ago now. And you guys had a couple of good fights on the radio, and like my dad used to tell me what to do, and then he stopped doing it. One time we went to Brands Hatch for this Formula Ford Champions race, and we were walking the track, and it was the Grand Prix weekend. And we got to the last corner, which was Paddock Bend. And my dad says to me, "That corner's flat." I'm like, that's not flat. There's no way that's flat. And he goes, "If you don't do that corner flat, then we might as well just get on the plane and go home." Right? So I go out in qualifying and I try to take it flat. I crash, write the car off. And I'm starting 40th out of all the cars. And that was the last time my dad ever told me how to drive, because he wasn't Bobby Wood. My dad never drove race cars, but you're a 3-time champion. So well,
you'd think that means something, right? But no, it was funny when Graham first started racing karts. I'd kind of throw my 2 cents in there, and he goes, "Dad, you never race karts, so don't tell me what to do." And I have to say that I would say things to him, and I never get the feeling that he was listening to me. But then I would hear him talking to somebody, he was over here talking to somebody. I'd hear him say what I had just said.
Yeah. So he's listening.
He's listening. He wasn't going to give me the satisfaction of admitting that he was listening to me, but he did. But, now where I come in is, trying to, I think, keep the emotion down, with drivers. And because I think I think it's good to be emotional to a certain extent, but if you go over that point in time, I think it's a negative. And I've always preached that to Graham. I've always preached that to other guys we've had is, you really need to divorce the emotionalism out of it, because I think that does cloud your judgment. And I think it does affect you negatively as to how you perform.
So, you got a big year ahead of you. It's the start of the season now. Has the season started off the way you want? Like, what are the goals? I mean, the team hasn't won in a little bit. So what are the realistic goals here, as we get into the meat of the season?
Yeah, well, we won Indy, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
So that's, some people never win Indy, so not bad. But, I think we made a lot of changes over the last few years. Brought a lot of people in with not a lot of experience. I think we paid a price for that. They're good people. They didn't have a lot of oval track, getting back to that oval track experience, IndyCar experience. But we've got some really good people in place this year. And I think we've already seen some good runs. Graham's been in the top 12, top 11 which doesn't sound so good, but just being in the top 15 stuff now. You got 27, 28 cars every race. But the pace in the race is very good. We just got to qualify a little better. We got we got one rookie, Louis Foster, who won the Indy Lights Championship last year. He really dominated that championship. Like maybe the last guy to do it, maybe it would have been you, to that level. And I think he's got real potential. And then Delvin DeFrancesco, a fellow Canadian.
Yeah.
He's had issues in both races. He had a flat tire at Thermal, where he probably would have been in the top 10 maybe if that hadn't happened. And so we just need a problem-free race for him. But the pace has been there, and so I'm really looking forward to Long Beach this weekend. Graham's got a new engineer, a fellow with experience, Yves Terrell, who's been around for a bit.
Yeah.
And they're starting to mesh. They're starting to mesh.
He was an engineer for me for just a very short time, but I always thought he was very good. I didn't even know he was in IndyCar anymore because I thought he went back to Europe for a little bit.
Yeah, no, he's got a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom, and I think that's such an important thing. You know what it's like. You look at the guys who are really successful in IndyCars or maybe any category, and they're guys that have had the relationships with their lead engineer for years. I mean, look at Will Power. He's had the same engineer since, 15, 16 years now, I think.
Well, you seem like you said, you've had the same guys working for you that were for 30 plus years. And, that I think that's one of the things that I notice now is like, you hear a lot of drivers just say, well, I had understeer and that's the way it was. And there's not a lot of improvising going on to try to drive around that problem. Because, I was going through a period in my career where I was struggling and the car wasn't the way I wanted. It was after I left Penske and I wanted a Reynard and Firestones, and I got a Reynard and Firestones, but this thing understeers like a pig. I went through a bunch of different engineers. Guy that worked for you, John Dick, was my engineer, and great guy, super nice guy. But for whatever reason, him and I couldn't get on the same page with each other. And they brought in a guy you probably raced against in Can-Am, Tony Sakali.
Oh yeah.
Barry brought him in for a test, and he took me out to dinner. And I had a lot of engineers would tell me, they tell you, oh, I got a magic fix for something. And they never seemed to have a magic fix. And I remember this one time I went with dinner with Tony, and he said to me, I'm only going to make the car a little bit better or a little bit worse. And when the green flag comes out, it's up to you it's up to you to figure it out.
There you go.
I can only change it a little bit either way. It is kind of is what it is. And you got what you got now. And I see a lot of young drivers now, Bobby, versus they just, I had understeer. So I just kind of gave up on the race, Yeah,
well, I think you're right. I mean, I think, I remember we had a driver that, kept on would say, well, if the car's not perfect. And I said, well,
never perfect.
I said, it's never going to be perfect. You just got to figure out how to make what you've got better than everybody else's. I mean, I was in Phoenix and I thought, God, this is going to be a long race. I think I qualified like 8th or 9th or something. And I just didn't, I was not happy with the car. But, next day it is what it is, and you got to make the best of it. And we ended up second in the race. So, I mean, for sure, if you're a driver and you have to wait for the car to be perfect, and
you'll be waiting a long time.
You'll be waiting a long time. That's right.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time, and it was great. I mean, I've never really sat down and talked to you before. Out of all the years that I've known you, we've never actually really talked racing.
Well, I'm glad
that was pretty cool for me, and especially talking about the Can-Am stuff.
Well, you're a hell of a driver, Paul, and it's great to be here with you, and it's nice to see you doing stuff like this because you have a lot of experience for people to learn from and to listen to, and so I was really pleased to be able to be invited to join you here, and I don't know if I'll see you at Long Beach, but I'm sure I'll see you at some races this year. Yeah,
I'll be there this weekend at Long Beach, so I'll come by and say hi.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
You bet. Take care.
All right.